So this is my exhibition, Mangled, Hopes for Bridges, as part of the Destination Venezuela event that we hosted in Vicksburg this September and October. It starts with a series of urban landscapes that was work that I've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years here in Kalamazoo, which is very much about the landscape I've been working on in Caracas. And then as we progress through the studio gallery, which has now gone back to being a working space, this is a series of paintings that I've been doing this year, working in this space, related to the migration of Venezuelans, which over the last couple of years have mostly been on foot. So it's a very dramatic, they're very dramatic scenes and photographs that I've been looking at and that we were studying while translating the documentation from Tulio Hernandez, who's been following this from Bogota in Colombia, since that's the way Venezuelans have to leave the country, is just walking across the border and then down through the Andes. And a lot of the paintings are about border crossings, these kind of places where these bottlenecks are created, where people are trying to cross bridges and over borders. And it's also a signage that's always interested me, this kind of the language of barriers and boundaries, and obviously it's very kind of present in these kind of situations. So this is about a border crossing and just the general difficulty of leaving on foot and just taking everything that you have on your back, children, your belongings, and just this enormous trek to find, minimal sustenance and be able to feed your family. This is a scene of women and children camping out under the sun, which is probably not it's not as joyful as it looks in the painting, but that's part of the scenery and the landscape that I knew. It's always very beautiful and succulent, but it can be quite harsh for people when they're having to walk through it. This painting was of the children who are left behind, so a lot of the people who leave are the able-bodied who can go and look for work, but then in Venezuela they leave behind children and older people. And this is another painting I've just started on the same theme of this long walk. So the exhibition was called The Long Walk and Back, but when we actually got to opening the exhibition, because of the pandemic and all the enormous problems that's created for everybody everywhere, I mean, to put that on top of the desperate situation of Venezuelans was just beyond cruel. So the people who'd managed to leave Venezuela and establish themselves, however precariously, abroad, were then having to leave again, because those are the jobs that go first, the most the least necessary, if you like, or the most improvised. So a lot of people were actually having to then walk back to Venezuela and were then detained at the border, being classified as bioterrorists. And well, now that the sort of the pandemic slowed down a bit, but now it's starting up again, so the whole crisis situation in Venezuela is getting worse. Food shortages, gasoline shortages, and people are walking from Caracas to the border with Colombia, which apparently takes about a week now. So it's an ongoing situation. A lot of these images came from photographs that I was looking at, which is not something that I usually do, but seeing these very surreal images of people fleeing the country. Basically, there have been periods when there's been a certain what's a good word for outlawing? I don't want to say persecution. Well, there's been a lot of negative feeling to the Colombian population which lives along the border with Venezuela. I mean, it's a very mixed population. The Venezuelan and Colombian cultures are also very close. But there have been periods when the border has been shut and people flee the country before they get shut down. So you have these images of people crossing rivers over makeshift bridges, carrying their furniture, carrying all their belongings. And it just seems all incredibly cruel and difficult. But it's also a larger theme of migration, and which I guess we're going to be seeing a lot more of with climate change and ecological breakdown and, you know, extinction of different species. It's going to be something that we're going to be seeing more of. So it sort of feels like a bigger issue than just the Venezuelan one, but certainly it's a very big crisis in Latin America. It's affecting the whole of the southern part of the continent. It's supposed to be second only to Syria, so we're talking about 4, maybe nearly 5 million Venezuelans who've left the country over the last, decade? But it's certainly accelerated in the last 4 or 5 years. We're talking about 4 or 5 million out of 30 million, so, you know, a quarter of the population, or a fifth. And so the whole theme of bridges and crossings has become one that I've become really interested in, just because that is a sort of point of contention and where a lot of the kind of conflict happens. You know, when you can't get over a bridge, people are trying to climb over it or around it or under it. That is something that I've been working on and continue to work on. And so this is a new painting which was not in the exhibition, but I do like this kind of theme of bridges, and then bringing into it images from pre-Columbian culture, which I've always been fascinated by. And then I use my own alphabet of symbols to kind of construct these images, which are present in the landscapes. It's a way of, it's a starting point for me, telling a story, so I can construct narratives with this alphabet. That's been an ongoing process, a way of working, a starting point. It's sort of built up through repetition, but you also find that every time you come back to it, there's something new that's added to it, and it grows again. So this is another narrative. I've started working kind of on vertical paintings. Thank you for coming to see my exhibition. It's been a pleasure and an honour to work with the Vicksburg Cultural Arts Centre this year in putting this whole event on. And we're really grateful for the opportunity to be able to talk about this, to show something of the place that we come from, and just to have, you know, the voice heard about what's going on in Venezuela.